Good evening. Almost every time before I'm set to present, I'm still writing things down. And if you could see, I won't make you read what I've just written down right here because it'd be hard pressed for you to be able to read it. It's running uphill and written in what appears to be a Greek cursive English combination right up here. So you will be a genius if you're able to interpret it. The reason that we are going to that was something that I kind of wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to say it, so I made some notes just to have it put down anyway. Tonight we are continuing miracles. We just have a handful left, 3 more after tonight, and tonight I believe is the 31st miracle. Which is healing the blind near Jericho. And this is a story that is found in 3 different places. I'll give you one. Which gospel is it not in? John. They're never in John, right? John had no interest in writing your silly stories about other things. He had his own thing. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke they all have stories, and we use the word synoptic. So this story appears in Matthew verses 29 to 34, Mark chapter 10 verses 46 through 52, and then Luke chapter 18 verses 35 through 43. We are going to be in Mark tonight for more than anything just because of the detail that's included. But you may have heard the saying before that the devil is in the details, and there's a little bit of that happening with this story here. We'll get the cart before the horse a little bit, but in Matthew 20 and Luke 18, there are no names mentioned. In fact, very rarely do we see miracles with names mentioned. At best, we might find the son of so-and-so, or maybe the mother-in-law of Peter if we go back when, but it's kind of a vague story about the person who had this wrong with them or that wrong with them. I think in part, why might there not always be the name of the person given? Good. The name may not have mattered. The deed is what would have mattered mostly. If you had been in some kind of issue and you had been healed, most of the people in the community would have realized that you went from bad to good in some form or another. Mary? Mm-hmm. I think we saw that maybe last week, where Jesus is sort of from point A to point B to point C to point D in the miracles, and we don't want to limit to just our study, but the miracles in many cases are stories that are happening to somebody who just happens to be along the way. And so in this one, Matthew and Luke won't give a name. In Mark, we do get a name, okay? In Mark chapter 10, my Bible has a heading at the top that says the healing of blind Bartimaeus. And I've read a good bit about this week. And I am sort of fascinated. I don't know which side I'm on here, but I'm going to present this to you and I'll let you think a little bit about it to start with. First of all, it's rare that a name is given, and only in, yes, ma'am. Mark chapter 10, verses 46 to 52. 46 to 52 in Mark chapter 10. Most of the time it's only in Mark, so I've thrown too much at you. I got the numbers mixed up. All right. So first of all, we'll get into some depth in just a second, but I want to present this to you. I'm not necessarily saying I'm for or against this thought, but you think about it. The name Bartimaeus is a combination of a word that's very abnormal. Okay? Bar, B-A-R, is quite common in the Bible. Blessed art thou, Simon Bar Jonah. Do we know what bar means? Son of. Okay? Son of, and that is a Hebrew way of describing it. It's really for any Semitic language, but it's Hebrew. Timaeus is a Greek word. But not only that, it's actually a Greek name from about 300 to 400 years prior to Jesus being on earth. And it was the name given. How many of you have heard of Plato, the Greek philosopher? I'm not asking you if you've read any Plato, but maybe sometime way back when in class, 40 years ago, you might have remembered the teacher said something about that. That was right before your head hit the ground when you went to sleep. But anyway, Plato, okay? So Plato was a philosopher, to philosophize, to think about, kind of how you would handle situations. And he had a story that he wrote about a man named Timaeus, okay? And this story of Timaeus, in this story, the idea was that light opens one's eyes to knowledge. So the debate potentially is that this name that's given to Bartimaeus may not in any way, shape, or form actually have been his name, because the name's not given anywhere else, but rather it is a symbolic play off of this sun bar of Timaeus, which is light. And we're going to see this man being healed. He was blind. And so what's the difference in being blind and not blind? Darkness and light, the ability to see. And so I don't know, and I'll leave it to you. I don't want to put anything in you one way or the other, but Bartimaeus is not a Hebrew name. Bartimaeus is a combination. But we know stories of things that happened 200 or 300 years ago, right? And sometimes people might use George Washington as a reference point for something that people would have known. And perhaps this name, Bartimaeus, because again, it's not mentioned anywhere else except for this one spot, it might just be a symbolic name, because we never see names of really anybody else, of someone whose eyes were open. Because we're not so concerned with the miracles. What was our main point in studying miracles? To confirm Jesus. What's our point today? What are we hoping to gain from it?
I think it reflects his majesty.
Okay.
His dominion over everything.
Okay. And so when we think about this person that's here, it doesn't matter if his name is Bartimaeus or Kevin or Maria. That doesn't matter, right? The idea is, but I did kind of find that interesting to consider. So we'll go with that. Yes. Sure. Sure. Absolutely. So. Absolutely. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But where this takes place is in Jericho. And this takes place, Jesus is passing through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover feast. Jericho is a name that we see quite often. The Bible's still a town. It's a fairly prominent town in Israel even today. But this will be Jesus's last journey to Jerusalem prior to his crucifixion. We are almost to the end of as we've been covering through this. The picture shown is what remains of Herod the Great's palace in Jericho. I just found this picture. You can see, obviously, it's a stone. I don't know what this even was, but this is what was left of Herod's palace in Jericho. But that gives you an idea of what kind of city it was, if that's where Herod chose to live. So it's a fairly prominent place there within. A few other things. Jericho lies in the Jordan River Valley. It's about 12 to 1,300 feet below sea level, so that's lower, I think, than Death Valley, even out in California. And it's just north of the Dead Sea. I had this same map. I should have made it a little bigger, but last week we were talking about the area around Samaria and Galilee, and then Jerusalem is down here. So Jericho is right there. So Jesus has sort of made his way from north to south there. In the New Testament, Jericho was a beautiful city, as you can see there, with a warm, pleasant climate. And it was famous for its date palms and its rose gardens. This picture here in the bottom are remains of housing in Jericho. It's one of the oldest cities in the scripture. You're probably most familiar with Jericho in the Joshua story, but even then it was a prominent city, and that's way back when. This was the so-called Tower of Jericho. I read a little bit about it, but not too much. It was thought that this was part of the city of Jericho in the Joshua story, but there's some thought that maybe this was older than that story. Of course, we talked about the walls of Jericho and all that. And then up at the top, I just wanted a picture of it because I wasn't sure what date palms were. So those are date palms. I guess you eat them. I don't know. Anybody ever had a date or a palm?
I think the palm is the tree, the date is the fruit off of it. It's like
Well, I didn't think you ate a palm. I didn't mean that. But just was. No, yeah, you marry them. Just go ahead and marry them. All right, but anyway, you get a sense of maybe what they are. I don't know if you would eat this or not, but that's what that was what they were famous for right there. The road to Jericho, however, we see in the story, and we'll see tonight, that Jesus was accompanied by a crowd. Anytime people were journeying this far, they typically journeyed in large groups. We see this quite often. Jesus, as a prominent person, seems to always have a group with him. But even if you weren't a prominent person, you would have traveled in a group. Do you remember the story of when Jesus was 12 and they go to the temple and then they leave and Jesus wasn't with them? We look at that today and think, oh, how awful. But the reality was people traveled in large groups in part to prevent themselves from falling into danger along the way. This is what the road looks like. This is what it looks like today between Jericho and Jerusalem. Now, I'm not saying this is the best road. I don't mean that, but it gives you an idea of what it would have been. But as the crowd leaves Jericho, a blind man, two, according to Matthew, sits by the wayside begging, crying to Jesus for mercy. And that's what we're going to be talking about this evening. This is our picture for the night from the Louvre in Paris. You can go see that. While everybody else is lined up looking at the Mona Lisa, you can go and look at this one as well. I don't know what it costs to get into the Louvre. I'd say it's a lot. So you could break into it and see it all as well. Don't do that. I'm sorry. It was probably not a good scene that your preacher just told you to break into a museum. So. Yeah, you know him, old Nick. You know, Saint Nick the painter. All right, but anyway, here we have right here. All right, so we're going to be in Mark, though. Again, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but we're going to be talking in Mark. Let's start with Mark chapter 10, and we'll look at verses 46 through 48. Mary, do you care to read this one? Yes. All right. So again, we're looking at the Mark version of this, and you can see there. So let's talk a little bit about what it was. I wanted to address this firsthand, so you already know the answer to this first question. But the name given to the man in Mark 10:46 was what? Bartimaeus. Very good. All right. And so what was the man doing in that verse? Sitting by the road begging. I think, was it last week or might have been 2 weeks ago, we talked about the lepers, but they were where? They were by the road doing what? I get a sense that your best hope, if you were in some kind of physical ailment, was to do what? To beg, right? And so today we have programs over the last couple hundred years or 100 years that have been designed to sort of help people who are in a difficult spot. But at the time, there was no programs like that. And if you couldn't work, you were in a really bad spot. And many times, even if you couldn't work, even if you had family, you were kind of a burden on that family because they had to provide for you, but maybe you couldn't. And so he's sitting by the road begging, and you're hoping that as this large group passes by, what might they do? Might give you something, maybe drop a few coins into your hat, or maybe a little bit of food or something along those lines. And so this does not seem like an ideal life that one would want to live. Now, the next verse 47, what did the man say to Jesus? And then does this statement sound familiar? All right, so if we look at all of it, Tom, I'm going to come back to yours in a second. You had the back end of it. You said son of David. What does he say at the very beginning, though, in verse 47? He says, Jesus. So he addresses Jesus, right? And then, comma, what, Mom? Son of David, right? I think it's in verse 47.
Jesus of Nazareth.
No, I think it just on verse 47. I'm asking, what did the man say? And he said, Jesus. So he calls him by name. So he's aware of him, right? But then the second thing he said was what? Son of David. Okay, now this will be a name that who would have called Jesus? What kind of person? Probably a Jewish person. A Gentile has no concern over David, right? So Jesus as this son of David. So based on those two things, does the man in this story seem to have a good recognition or understanding of who Jesus was? Absolutely so. But he says, Jesus, son of David, was the third thing then, Tom. Have mercy on me. We talked about that again. I can't remember if that was last week or if that was the week before, but have mercy on me. What do we think? What does that mean? Wanting to heal him, all right? Wanting to heal him, wanting to have some kind of compassion, wanting some type of help. And the people that pass by on a daily basis might be able to drop some change or drop some food, but nobody can really help him. Now remember, he's blind. So how does he know who's coming by? He heard. I think it's clear that the word, there's Jesus. There's Jesus. This is Jesus. This is the guy. This is, I'm sure that has been bandied about just a little bit. So he shoots his shot, as it were, with Jesus right here. Now, when the blind man speaks, when he asks that of Jesus, how did the crowd react? This is two questions, but I want to look at the first part. How does the crowd react to him saying, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me? Scolded him. Do I have another word? Warned him in the New King James. Tom, in what did you say, Tom? Be quiet in the Lincoln County parlance right there. All right, scolded, warned him, be quiet is what the crowd says. Now, did it have any effect on the man? Not at all. It doesn't seem to have any effect on him at all, because at the back half of 48, what does he say? He cried out even more. So it's almost like, well, I'm at this level. I'm just going to be a little bit louder right here. And what does he say? Son of David. So he essentially repeats what he had said the time before. Son of David, have mercy on me. And he says it a little bit louder, because you all are not going to shut me up. I'm going to say it. And if I have to yell it through a megaphone, whatever it's going to take, because Jesus may not walk by here again. And so when he walks by, I got to figure out a way. And he's a blind man. He can't just say, okay, he had the red shirt on, so I'll fall. He can't even do that. It's got to be right here, right now. So we've set the stage for what we're looking at. This man is going to hopefully be healed by Jesus. Now, Mark 10, verse 49 and 50. Will, do you care to read this, buddy? All right. So when you're blind, you're at the mercy of others, but in many ways, you kind of have to be led by others as well. This is something that you can't maybe take that next step because you don't know where that next step is going to be. But this is a good, interesting look at how the crowd changes right here. So let's talk a little bit about that. When Jesus stops and calls for man, so what we've seen in the first couple of verses is this man, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, son of David, you've seen him get a little bit louder. The people are telling him, quiet, quiet, hush, hush. When Jesus stops and called for the man, what does he do? All right. So he threw aside his garment. He had, he gets up, he goes to them. So he tosses that stuff. Why do you think he did that? I think this is my own. Yeah. I would think so. I think that's possibly that. What else? What else might he have? Tossed all of his stuff aside, went to Jesus. He's in a hurry. I have no idea if he's wearing it or not, But, if you're holding, you holding that, just get rid of it. I kind of read that as like, just get all this stuff off of me. I got to get from here to right there. So he is in a hurry. He was waiting on Jesus to what? To heal. And so all he needed, when he's yelling and screaming, all he needed was for Jesus to say, get over here, or come over here, or do whatever it might would be. And when he hears it, it's like, time to go. Y'all ever watch Price is Right? When they call, Connie, Ronnie, come on down. And what are they? It's like, just running down there immediately, right? Hugging and kissing everybody along the way. It's like, man, I've needed a washer dryer for years. I'm going to win it. All right. So that's kind of what we see right here. It's like, I've been waiting on this forever. And now I can go do it. I've got the invite right here. Now, it's not a real long story, and we finish it right here. Mark chapter 10. Yes. Sure. Absolutely. Let's look then at verses 51 and 52, because we've not seen Jesus talk yet. In that previous verse, it said that Jesus called for him, and what did the crowd do? Yeah, get up there. It's your turn. Go. Now, the crowd had a big turn, right? Because what was the crowd telling him like a verse before? Be quiet, hush. We've heard enough of you. It's like, oh no, you get to go. Go on down there now. So the crowd flips just a little bit. We've not seen Jesus do anything or talk, well, not seen him actually speak yet, even though clearly he had. All right, Connie, verses 51 and 52, dear. Rabboni. Now, here in a minute, we're going to go look at Luke and we're going to go look at Matthew as well. But our question and answer are only going to come from these two verses right now. So if you know more of the story, hold that off for a second. We'll look right here at this. But we see in the first question, what question did Jesus ask of the man? Verse 51. What do you want me to do for you? Now, some of y'all got old King James. What does it say? Same thing? What would thou that I should do unto you? So the same thing, right? What do you want me to do? How many books, stories, movies has there been where a genie appears and says, I will grant you a wish? And so then the person's like, ooh, what do I do, right? Well, if the genie appears in that situation and you get a wish, what do I want? Do I want a lot of money? Do I want to live forever? Does a smart person say, I want endless wishes, so I shall always be able to wish more? What would it be? Well, who knows in the story? That's why books are written. But in this story, Jesus says to the guy, he says, what do you want? Well, be that guy for a minute. You've been sitting on the road to Jericho, perhaps as most dangerous place that there's ever been. You've been blind, maybe for life, but probably for a long time, if not life. You've had your hand out, hoping, praying, begging for something good to come your way. When Jesus saunters by, you yell for him, and the people say, hush, and you yell louder, and it just so happens that he says, come to you. But he doesn't say, you're healed. He says, what can I do for you, right? What would you like? Well, this is like ideal customer service, right? How can I help you is what Jesus is asking. So if you're this guy, how have your spirits changed in the course of a day? You've went from here to here, right? And you've not even asked the question yet. So in verse 51, how did the blind man reply? He asked what every single one of us would have said. I'd like to be able to see. Because how many more doors will be open for this guy if he's able to see? All of them, right? I mean, I don't know how old he is, but the odds are that he'll be able to do more jobs. He'll be able to get paid. He probably won't have to sit outside. He wouldn't be a burden to his family any longer. He would be able to help himself in that case. He says, I would like to have my sight. So Jesus responds in what way? The second time we see Jesus, what does he say in verse 52? Now, of all the ways that we've seen Jesus heal, here's another one, right? We see in Mark no touching, no hugging, no smacking, no spitting, no rubbing, no anything. He says, go thy way. Then what? So he was healed immediately. Now, the reality is, Jesus probably could have done this as he's walking past him on the road, right? You know, you're healed, right? But we see here, Jesus and this man do what? They interact. Why is interaction so important in life? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely. Uh-huh. And sure, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, Tom. Absolutely. And we've seen, we're in, a couple years into Jesus' teaching by this point. But even before Jesus, you'd probably say this man was hoping somebody'd walk by and be able to heal him. But you're right, Tom. Maybe in the last couple of years now, he's starting to hear there's a guy who's around here that could do something for it. Why is interaction between Christians and non-Christians important today? Absolutely.
We can bring them to Jesus.
Yeah.
And all anybody in the whole world really ever needs is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they need. If a little baby 3 months old dies, they've got Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they need.
Sure.
They didn't live 80 years old, and that's okay.
Right.
They got Jesus. They had Jesus when they started, and they got Jesus throughout all eternity.
So for us, the idea of interacting with people is an essential part of, I think, Christianity. The concept, this idea, this thought that there must be preaching and teaching, right? Well, Sunday morning I'm preaching, and right now I'm teaching, but can any interaction be as the teachers would say, a teachable moment? Of course. There's always opportunities to be able to teach. And Jesus is teaching here, and we should do the same thing. This doesn't mean, all right, I got to have you come to my house. We need to, we'll be here for a couple of hours and we'll do that. That doesn't have to be what teaching is. Anything can be teaching. And the simplest of interactions with Jesus sort of exposed people to what they could have access to. And it was those earlier interactions that helped spread the word that eventually wound its way back to this man. And so the interactions that you have might not necessarily be for that person that you're in communication with, but it might be a door to turn to somebody else along the way. So never neglect the opportunity for an interaction. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we don't have, there may be more said even than what we see right here. But Jesus said for that man to come up to him, right? And the people are like, hey, go up there and talk to him. Go up there and talk to him. And that's what we see. You're right, Connie. Like that's kind of, who knows what that communication was like between Jesus and that man, maybe even more than what we saw right then and there. There's a couple of other sort of versions of what happens here. I want to look at both of them. One's Luke 18 and one is Matthew chapter 20. You can look, but they're right up here as well. Luke 18 and verse 40, Luke 18 and verse 42. Linda Denham, do you care to read that one? So in Luke 18 and verse 42, we see a sort of similar quote right there. Jesus spoke 3 more words than what he spoke or what we read in Mark. What are the 3 other words right there? Receive your sight. Okay, and so the receive your sight. And that's assumed, of course, in Mark, but we can see it right there as well. And then Matthew chapter 20 and verse 34. Now, this is where it's told a little bit differently, but Maria, do you care to read this one? So in Matthew, it talks about there being 2 people. I don't know. I don't know if there was multiple people. It's sometimes these stories are a little hard to interpret right there. But what did Jesus do in Matthew chapter 20? It says that he touched their eyes. So we've kind of, you got 3 versions of the story. You can kind of pile them into one, perhaps. But I do want you to see to see what each of them said. Questions about that before we go any further? Yeah. That's an important point that has changed over the course of the lessons. In our earliest lessons, don't follow, don't tell. Now, and we talked about that a week or so ago, I think we've started to see more and more of what Tony said right there. Like, yeah, come on. I think it's a losing battle to say, don't go tell. It was kind of a losing battle to say, don't follow me. You're going to follow anyway. You're going to tell anyway. And so now it's like, well, let's just bring more people along with it. Now, Tony kind of took what the last thing we want to look at, which is Luke 18 and verse 43. The man receives his sight here. Mom, do you care to read this one? Now, we've seen that first line before where it says that when somebody was healed in some way, they glorified God. I think I've asked that question 10 times, and I think Ben has said every time, worship. That's the word that we would kind of use right there. I want to look at the second line. And all the people, when they saw it, which tells us what? They witnessed this. They saw a man blind who now could see, right? So when they saw it, then they do what? They gave praise to God. So they don't praise until they actually see it, right? But you know the old saying, the proof's in the pudding, right? Now this guy who couldn't see, now he can. It's like, all right, that was something else, right? That was something else. And so what do you think? And I know I've asked this question because I'm about out of questions after 31 lessons. What do you think those people went and did? Now they just had permission to do it, right? 2 months ago, I was like, don't tell it. Absolutely. It helped grow their faith. Can our faith grow today by the actions of other people? Of course. How many of you, when you see somebody be baptized or you see somebody say, I'm going to need to make a change in your life, how many of you sense a growth of faith? You didn't do anything. But why does that help our faith grow? Mm-hmm. We're strengthened by them. We feel good about them. And it maybe makes us sort of consider things in ourselves as well. It's like, well, that makes me feel stronger or better or whatever it would be in that case. All right. Any questions before we wrap things up?
Many more miracles than just what we
Sure.
And I think by the time we got to here, one reason he had quit telling them not to tell them, he knew that the word was out there.
Yeah.
That's the reason I think he just quit telling them.
But you're wasting your breath by telling that. That's probably true. And at the end of the book of John, right? The John says if we wrote everything that had happened, you wouldn't have enough. They wouldn't have enough books. So we've talked about that some. Like we're covering 34 miracles, but there's no way that that's the minimum on it as well. But I think you're right, Kevin. We are almost to the end of Jesus' life, and you're just wasting time trying to say don't tell anybody about it by this point. It would have been a fool's errand to try and do that. All right. Sure. Absolutely. All right. 3 things to go home with. Number 1, don't let anyone dampen your enthusiasm for Jesus. And people do that, right? So think about Bartimaeus here in this story. He heard Christ was nearby and he had one chance to be healed. And what was the only resource at Bartimaeus's control? His voice was the only thing. So what did he do with his voice? He hollered. And when people said, be quiet, what did he do? He hollered even louder right there. They could have said, you need to be quiet. And he could have said, okay. I won't say anything else. But would he have been healed? It might have. That was the door for him to be able to get there. So when we're chasing after God or when we're seeking out more from God, we don't need to let people dampen our enthusiasm, silences. Number 2, obstacles can be cast aside, right? Hebrews chapter 12, 1 and 2, what Kevin read there just a moment ago, encourages us to lay aside every obstacle and anything that would block us from God. And then we were getting ready to leave for church tonight, and the FedEx man showed up, and he parked right in front of my truck. I couldn't have left if I'd wanted to. And he brought the stuff in, and I met him out there and got whatever it was. But that was an obstacle, right? And it would have made it really difficult for me to have come to church. But the reality is, I probably could have backed up. I could have went through the yard. I might have went over the hump just a little bit. I could have made it, right? That obstacle. But if I want to go somewhere, if I need something, obstacles can be set aside. But we have to pursue those things because the obstacle can get really bigger than it really is if we want it to be there. If we want that obstacle to be there, then it can be quite a bit bigger with us. But if we're seeking out God, then cast those obstacles away. Third one, don't pay attention to the crowd. Oh, as a high school teacher, how many times I have said this, right? As a parent, how many times did you say something like this? And it went in one ear and out the other for most people, right? But we have a hard time avoiding the crowd sometimes, right? But had it been up to the crowd, Jesus would have walked right on by, going wherever it was that he was really going, and everything would have remained the same. But when Jesus stops to talk to Bartimaeus, what did the crowd do? They're like, oh, this is pretty cool. Maybe. So the crowd went from boo or don't do this to, oh, man, maybe I can do. The crowd is the same 2,000 years ago as it is today. It will go wherever the wind takes it. And they still will today. We can't listen to the crowd because crowds are changeable, right? It depends on who's in the crowd as to what direction it's going to go. But external effects are going to direct the crowd along the way. But we have to base our decisions on a standard that doesn't change. The crowd standard changes. It always changes. It depends on who's in the room, who's in the building, who's with you, as to what the standard there would be. But God doesn't change, right? We read that over and over again. What do we read in Hebrews Hebrews 13, verse 8, that God is the same when? Yesterday, today, and forever. Well, that covers everything, right? Yesterday is everything that's already come before. Today is right now, and forever is not tomorrow, but it's all the forevers away. And so if we're paying attention to the crowd, the answer is going to be different today, yesterday, and tomorrow. But with Jesus, the answer is going to, Jesus is going to be the same no matter what. Questions? Comments?
Somebody told a story or thing, and everybody just started laughing. Well, I just laughed too. And then it got real quiet, and the guy standing beside me said, "What did he say, Shelby?" And I did not know.
Yeah.
It got real quiet. And I thought, I probably should have laughed so hard, probably didn't know what to say. And so it's really bad. It's really bad. That's how crowds, you can just go with the crowd and get into it.
It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. There's your answer right there. All right. Any other thoughts or anything before we wrap up? I've told you a time or two, I think, here